Well, it's good to see everyone this morning. My mother used to use this expression quite a bit. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you've used it yourself some, but it's the phrase, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Yeah, I wouldn't miss it for the world. It's a way that we try to assure another person that we're devoted, we're dedicated, we're going to be there for them, we're going to be there at their event. Most of the time, whatever it is, we're saying that that's going to be my priority. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Think about it though, it's like we're saying, if the whole world were offered to me, I would still choose to be at my niece's play than to inherit the entire world. And it kind of makes me wonder how honest we are, really. Because, when I think about the inheriting the world, the things that really would kind of appeal to me, I would think, well, if I could get Glacier National Park and the Alps and Yellowstone, Yosemite, and a private jet to get me from place to place, and the great lodges that are there, could have them just for me and my friends who accompany me on these trips, then if I'm offered that versus, going to your kid's play, I'm probably not going to show up. And maybe those things don't resonate with you, but if it was, you're getting New York City, we're giving you Paris, you get London, you get Beijing, whatever the great cities of the world are, and all the glory that's associated with them are going to be yours. You're going to have control and ownership over all of these things. Then, you would also miss your niece's play because, hey, you own Broadway now, and you're going to put her and her whole eighth grade, class on Broadway. So, yeah. We need to think carefully before we tell people I wouldn't miss it for the world when maybe that's not quite true. In fact, the honest truth is that most people would miss your event for the world. And most people would trade their own souls for the world. Maybe we all do in some measure, greater or lesser. And if people will trade their own soul for the world, or a very small sliver of it, then how much more would somebody sell your soul or trade your soul for them to inherit the world? All of that just makes us pause to think for a little bit about how important it is, the people we choose to entrust ourselves to, isn't it? Who you're going to choose as a marriage partner, who you're going to choose as a friend, who you're going to choose as a business partner. These are all things in which you want to know of a person's loyalty and their integrity, their dedication to you and to the cause that you are pursuing before you lean the weight of your life on that person. Are they going to be there for you? Or will, under the right circumstances, they forget all about you and abandon you? It's a big question. And especially when it comes to thinking about the ultimate foundations of our very lives. Who are we going to build our lives on? Who are we going to lean and trust in with everything? Because all of us are going to build our lives on something. We're going to lean on someone. We're going to trust someone with all of it. And maybe we think, well, I just trust myself. But again, the question comes back, are you really that trustworthy? That you think you can handle your own soul and never bargain it away for something of inferior value? I think that kind of reasoning leads me to more and more confidently say, I want to trust in Jesus. I want to build my life on Jesus. I want to lean the weight of my entire existence and entrust the care of my soul both now and forever to Him and to Him alone. And to try to learn to do that increasingly. And I think that that's so much about what our gatherings here each Lord's Day morning and remembering this supper is about. In Luke chapter 4, and beginning in verse 5, there's one of the three temptations that we know that Satan tempted Jesus with after he had been in the wilderness for 40 days fasting. It says there in Luke chapter 4, verse 5, that the devil led him up to a high place and showed him in a moment of time all the kingdoms of the world. So clearly this is some sort of a miraculous vision. They go up in a high place. I think Matthew's account says a very high mountain, but I think that literally the idea is that this is some figurative high place where, as it were, one could look down upon and see all the splendor, the magnificence, and the glory of the kingdoms of the world. And it says that it was shown to him in a moment of time, which I wonder too if that doesn't sort of have like this time-lapsed kind of concept where not only is he seeing all the kingdoms of the world that were extant at that moment, but throughout all history, all of these things flash before him, and he just sees worldly glory, worldly power and authority, worldly accomplishment and achievement, all the things that this world and humankind can produce and in which we find such pleasure and take such glory in. He sees all of it. And he says to him, I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. Now, we might quibble with Satan about his claim here. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness of it, but I think there is a sense in which Satan, as the usurper, has through deception and coercion led the world astray. And as John describes, or Jesus says in the Gospel of John, the whole world lies under the sway or the influence of the wicked one. And so he is saying that in some sense, I have this authority and I will grant it all to you. I will hand it over, deliver it to you. You can do with it what you will. And this sort of, if you're a Tolkien geek, reminds me of the scene in the movie or in the books of Galadriel being offered the ultimate ring of power. And she goes through imagining in a moment of time all that could be done with that virtually unlimited resource, and then decides not to take the ring because she knows that it would corrupt her. And so Jesus also, given this opportunity to take the world and all and authority over it and have the use of all of its glory and splendor, says Satan says to him in verse 7, if you worship me, it will all be yours. So you can have it all based on the condition that you just worship me. And maybe the idea is just once, just this one time. If you'll just right here in this moment of time, bow down and acknowledge me as your superior, as one worthy of worship, then I'll grant you all of these things. This would be an inversion of values, to take that which is lowest and adore it or acknowledge it and regard it as that which is the highest. And it would have corrupted Jesus, it would have corrupted everything. Even though if his intentions had been good, still ruling over the kingdoms of the world, he could never then have been the sinless sacrifice that would take away the sins of the world. So his reign over the world would always be a reign over a sin-cursed world that was subject to sin, sorrow, and death. Could never have redeemed it from the curse of the law. And so, in spite of what good he may have done, it would ultimately have been to give everything away, to trade, as it were, his own soul and the souls of all the world in order to gain the glory of the world. Again, a temptation that maybe we all face. And Jesus is a great example to us here in this, that he rejects Satan's offer and says to him, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Which I think is interesting to note that Jesus adds that to what Satan had asked him to do, because Jesus knows the one you worship is also the one you serve. And it won't be like I can just worship, I can just bow down before you here in this moment and then go on and serve God. No, because the one that we adore, the one that we set upon the highest place will be the one that ultimately we serve. And Jesus says, this is forbidden. This is an inversion of how things ought to be, and I will not do it. And so Jesus overcomes this particular temptation. It would have been a shortcut to the throne. He would have sat at the right hand of Satan instead of the right hand of God. It would have been a crown, to be sure, many crowns of many cities and many nations, but a crown without a cross. And so to take possession of a sin-cursed world without hope of its redemption. And the reason that Jesus gives for refusing this offer is first and foremost because it is written, you shall not worship any God but God, no other God. And the second reason, though not cited, is necessarily connected with it. And that is that the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. In other words, the God that I serve has sent me here on a mission, and that mission is not simply to, through demonic power and authority, rule the world, but rather it is through submission to the will of the Father, give my life as a sacrifice for the sins of many. And I am going to do the will of the Father rather than take the offer of the devil. And so Jesus, the one who comes to serve and not to be served, to give his life as a ransom for many, passes the test. Now, let's try to put that in a little bit different terms. I've written down here, when Jesus saw all the authority and glory of this world's kingdoms, he also saw the simple table fellowship of those he would redeem by his costly sacrifice and said, I choose them over this. Did you follow that? If Satan shows Jesus all the glory and all the splendor of the kingdoms of this world and offers him the rule and the reign over all of that in its sin-cursed condition, and Jesus says no to that, it had to be because there was something else, some other inheritance that he is looking for that he regards as more valuable to him than all the kingdoms of this world attained through the worship of Satan, through coercive means, through deceptive means, through evil means. He values your presence here this morning and being able to join with you here today as something of greater value than all the kingdoms of the world. Look at Hebrews. In Hebrews chapter 12, he talks about how we are to keep our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. So Jesus was able to overcome temptation and overcome the suffering of the cross by keeping his eye on the joy that was before him, the joy that would be accomplished through his suffering and death. That was where Jesus fixed his attention, and we're supposed to fix our attention on him who shows us that way. But what I want to spend just a moment on as we wrap up is the idea of what joy did Jesus have set before him that enabled him to endure the cross? What was the joy set before him? I think a little bit earlier in the book of Hebrews, backing up to chapter 2, we get some valuable insight to that. In Hebrews 2, beginning verse 10, it says, "In bringing many sons to glory, sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered." So the idea set out here is that Jesus is a pioneer. He's leading the way. He's the hero, one translation puts it, of our salvation, blazing the trail for the rest of humanity to follow. And if he's going to do that, then he, like us, must suffer the same sorts of things that we suffer in order for him to be the perfect Savior. And so it says in verse 11, both the one who makes people holy, that's Jesus, and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them his brethren. He's not ashamed to call us his brothers and sisters because he has identified himself fully with us, both in his humanity and in his sorrows and pain and suffering and death. Jesus has identified himself fully with us. So much so that when we willingly are moved by his loving self-sacrifice on our behalf, that we're willing to, like him, renounce the world in order to follow him and trust in him. He is glad to call us his brothers and sisters. He is not ashamed to call us his family. It's amazing. He goes on and he quotes some Old Testament passages that allude to this. In verse 12, he says, "I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters." That's the idea of Jesus leading in the assembly, of declaring the name of God over us. "I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly, I will sing your praises." And verse 13, "I will put my trust in him." And again, he says, "Here am I and the children God has given me." Think about that statement right there as we bring this to a close. Here am I and the children God has given to me. Not here I am and the world that the devil gave to me for just a little moment's worship, but here I am with a gathered assembly of brothers and sisters that I've redeemed by my blood, who I am not ashamed to be identified with, and I'm standing with you this morning before our God, Jesus unseen, standing with us this morning saying, "Here I am and the children you have given me." Isn't that beautiful? Jesus is here with us. He's not ashamed of you. He's come from a throne of endless glory to suffer by way of Bethlehem, by way of a cross at Calvary, by way of a tomb where he crushed the power of sin and death and rose again, and by his Spirit is with us today, not ashamed, identifying with us and saying, "You're my brothers and sisters, and I am happy to present you before the Father." It's amazing. And so as we gather for this supper today, we're the joy that was set before him, that enabled him to endure the cross, that enabled him to say no to the temptations of the world, the flesh, and the devil. And so we may humbly ask right now, Lord Jesus, would you meet with us here this morning and share in this not great, glorious meal in the eyes of the world, but would you celebrate this supper with us, your humble children? And Jesus says, "I wouldn't miss it for the world." And he means it. This time we'll ask Jay and those who are serving to come forward.